The Ninth Skeleton by Clark Ashton Smith. It was beneath the immaculate blue of a morning in April that I set out to keep my appointment with Guinevere. We had agreed to meet on Boulder Ridge, at a spot well known to both of us, a small and circular field surrounded with pines and full of large stones, midway between her parents' home at Newcastle and my castle on the northeastern extremity of the ridge, near Auburn. Guinevere is my fiancée. It must be explained that at the time of which I write, there was a certain amount of opposition on the part of her parents to the engagement, an opposition since happily withdrawn. In fact, they had gone so far as to forbid me to call, and Guinevere and I could see each other only by stealth and infrequently. The ridge is a long and rambling moraine, heavily strewn in places with boulders, as its name implies, and with many outcroppings of black volcanic stone. Fruit ranches cling to some of its slopes, but scarcely any of the top is under cultivation. And much of the soil, indeed, is too thin and stony to be arable. With its twisted pines often as fantastic in form as the cypresses of the California coast, and its gnarled and stunted oaks, the landscape has a wild and quaint beauty, with more than a hint of the Japanesque in places. It is perhaps 2 miles from my cabin to the place where I was to meet Guinevere. Since I was born in the very shadow of Boulder Ridge, and have lived upon or near it for most of my 30-odd years, I am familiar with every rod of its lovely and rugged extent, and previous to that April morning would scarcely have refrained from laughing if anyone had told me I could possibly lose my way. Since then, well, I assure you, I should not feel inclined to laugh. Truly it was a morning made for the trysts of lovers. Wild bees were humming busily in the patches of clover and in the ceanothus bushes with their great masses of white flowers, whose strange and heavy perfume intoxicated the air. Most of the spring blossoms were abroad. Cyclamen, yellow violet, poppy, wild hyacinth, and woodland star, and the green of the fields was opalescent with their colors. Between the emerald of the buckeyes, the gray-green of the pines, the golden and dark and bluish greens of the oaks, I caught glimpses of the snow-white Sierras to the east, and the faint blue of the Coast Range to the west, beyond the pale and lilac levels of the Sacramento Valley. Following a vague trail, I went onward through the brushy woodland, and across open fields where I had to thread my way among clustering boulders. My thoughts were all of Guinevere, and I looked only with a casual and desultory eye at the picturesqueness and vernal beauty that environed my path. I was halfway between my cabin and the meeting place when I became suddenly aware that the sunlight had darkened, and glanced up thinking, of course, that an April cloud appearing unobserved from beyond the horizon had passed across the sun. Imagine then my surprise when I saw that the azure of the entire sky had turned to a dun and sinister brown, in the midst of which the sun was clearly visible, burning like an enormous round red ember. Then something strange and unfamiliar in the nature of my surroundings, which I was momentarily at a loss to define, forced itself upon my attention, and my surprise became a growing consternation. I stopped and looked about me, and realized, incredible as it seemed, that I had lost my way, for the pines on either hand were not those that I had expected to see. They were more gigantic, more gnarled than the ones I remembered, and their roots writhed in wilder and more serpentine contortions from a soil that was strangely flowerless, and where even the grass grew only in scanty tufts. There were boulders large as druidic monoliths, and the forms of some of them were such as one might see in a nightmare, thinking, of course, that it must all be a dream, but with a sense of utter bewilderment which seldom, if ever, attends the absurdities and monstrosities of nightmare. I sought in vain to orient myself and to find some familiar landmark in the bizarre scene that lay before me. A path, broader than the one I had been following, but running in what I judged to be the same direction, wound on among the trees. It was covered with a gray dust, which, as I went forward, became deeper and displayed footprints of a singular form, footprints that were surely too attenuate, too fantastically slender to be human, despite their 5 toe marks. Something about them, I know not what, something in the nature of their very thinness and elongation, made me shiver. Afterward I wondered why I had not recognized them for what they were. But at the time, no suspicion entered my mind, only a vague sense of disquietude and indefinable trepidation. As I proceeded, the pines amid which I passed became momentarily more fantastic and more sinister in the contortions of their boughs and boles and roots. Some were like leering hags, others were obscenely crouching gargoyles. Some appeared to writhe in an eternity of hellish torture, others were convulsed as with a satanic merriment. All the while the sky continued to darken slowly, the dun and dismal brown that I had first perceived turning through almost imperceptible changes of tone to a dead, funereal purple, wherein the sun smoldered like a moon that had risen from a bath of blood. The trees in the whole landscape were saturated with this macabre purple, were immersed and steeped in its unnatural gloom. Only the rocks as I went on grew strangely paler, and their forms were somehow suggestive of headstones, of tombs and monuments. Beside the trail, there was no longer the green of vernal grass, only an earth mottled by the drying algae and tiny lichens the color of verdigris. Also there were patches of evil-looking fungi, with stems of a leprous pallor and blackish heads that drooped and nodded loathsomely. The sky had now grown so dark that the whole scene took on a semi-nocturnal aspect, and made me think of a doomed world in the twilight of a dying sun. All was airless and silent. There were no birds, no insects, no sighing of the pines, no lisping of leaves. A baleful and preternatural silence, like the silence of the infinite void. The trees became denser, then dwindled, and I came to a circular field. Here there was no mistaking the nature of the monolithal boulders. They were headstones and funeral monuments, but so enormously ancient that the letterings or figures upon them were well nigh effaced, and the few characters that I could distinguish were not of any known language. About them there was the hoariness and mystery and terror of incomputable eld. It was hard to believe that life and death could be as old as they. The trees around them were inconceivably gnarled and bowed as with an almost equal burden of years. The sense of awful antiquity that these stones and pines all served to convey increased the oppression of my bewilderment, confirmed my disquietude. Nor was I reassured when I noticed on the soft earth about the headstones a number of those attenuate footprints of which I have already spoken. They were disposed in a fashion that was truly singular, seeming to depart from and return to the vicinity of each stone. Now for the first time I heard a sound other than the sound of my own footfalls in the silence of this macabre scene. Behind me, among the trees, there was a sibilant rustling followed by a faint and evil rattling. I turned and listened. There was something in these sounds that served to complete the demoralization of my unstrung nerves, and monstrous fears, abominable fancies, trooped like the horde of a witch's sabbat through my brain. The reality that I was now to confront was no less monstrous. There was a whitish glimmering in the shadow of the trees, and a human skeleton, bearing in its arms the skeleton of an infant, emerged and came toward me. Intent as on some ulterior cryptic purpose, some charnel errand not to be surmised by the living, it went on by a tranquil pace, an effortless and gliding tread, in which, despite my terror and stupefaction, I perceived a certain horrible and feminine grace. I followed the apparition with my eyes as it passed among the monuments without pausing, and vanished in the darkness of the pines on the opposite side of the field. No sooner had it gone than a second, also bearing in its arms an infant skeleton, appeared and passed before me in the same direction, and with the same abominable and loathsome grace of movement. A horror that was more than horror, a fear that was beyond fear, petrified all my faculties, and I felt as if I were weighted down by some ineluctable and insupportable burden of nightmare. Before me, skeleton after skeleton, each precisely like the last, with the same macabre lightness and ease of motion, each carrying its pitiful infant, emerged from the shadow of the ancient pines and followed where the first had disappeared, intent as on the same cryptic errand. One by one they came till I had counted 8. Now I knew the origin of the bizarre footprints whose attenuation had disturbed and troubled me. When the eighth skeleton had passed from sight, my eyes were drawn as by some irresistible impulsion to one of the nearer headstones, beside which I was amazed to perceive what I had not noticed before, a freshly opened grave, gaping darkly in the soft soil. Then at my elbow I heard a low rattling, and the fingers of a fleshless hand plucked lightly at my sleeve. A skeleton was beside me, differing only from the others through the fact that it bore no infant in its arms. With a lipless and ingratiating leer, it plucked again at my sleeve as if to draw me toward the open grave, and its teeth clicked as if it were trying to speak. My senses and my brain, a swirl in gulfs of hideous terror, could endure no more. I seemed to fall and fall through deeps of infinite eddying blackness with the clutching terror of those fingers upon my arm, till consciousness was left behind in my descent. When I came to, Guinevere was holding me by the arm, concern and puzzlement upon her sweet oval face, and I was standing among the boulders of the field appointed for our rendezvous. "What on earth is the matter with you, Herbert?" she queried anxiously. "Are you ill? You were standing here in a daze when I came, and didn't seem to hear or see me when I spoke to you, and I really thought you were going to faint when I touched your arm."
Unseen, Unfeared by Francis Stevens. I had been dining with my ever-interesting friend Mark Jenkins at a little Italian restaurant near South Street. It was a chance meeting. Jenkins is too busy usually to make dinner engagements. Over our highly seasoned food and sour, thin red wine, he spoke of little odd incidents and adventures of his profession. Nothing very vital or important, of course. Jenkins is not the sort of detective who first detects and then pours the egotistical and revealing details of achievement in the ears of every acquaintance, however appreciative. But when I spoke of something I had seen in the morning papers, he laughed. "Poor old Doc Holt. Fascinating old codger to anyone who really knows him. I've had his friendship for years, since I was first on the city force and saved a young assistant of his from jail on a false charge. And they had to drag him into the poisoning of this young sport, Ralph Peeler." "Why are you so sure he couldn't have been implicated?" I asked. But Jenkins only shook his head with a quiet smile. "I have reasons for believing otherwise," was all I could get out of him on that score. "But," he added, "the only reason he was suspected at all is the superstitious dread of these ignorant people around him. Can't see why he lives in such a place. I know for a fact he doesn't have to. Doc's got money of his own. He's an amateur chemist and dabbler in different sorts of research work, and I suspect he's been guilty of showing off. Result, they all swear he has the evil eye and holds forbidden communion with invisible powers. Smoke?" Jenkins offered me one of his invariably good cigars, which I accepted, saying thoughtfully, "A man has no right to trifle with the superstitions of ignorant people. Sooner or later it spells trouble. Did in his case. They swore up and down that he sold love charms openly and poisoned secretly, and that together with his living so near to somebody else, got him temporarily suspected. But my tongue's running away with me as usual." "As usual," I retorted impatiently. "You open up with all the frankness of a Chinese diplomat." He beamed upon me engagingly and rose from the table with a glance at his watch. "Sorry to leave you, Blaisdell, but I have to meet Jimmy Brennan in 10 minutes. He so clearly did not invite my further company that I remained seated for a little while after his departure, then took my own way homeward. Those streets always held for me a certain fascination, particularly at night. They are so unlike the rest of the city, so foreign in appearance, with their little shabby stores, always open until late evening, their unbelievably cheap goods, displayed as much outside the shops as in them, hung on the fronts and laid out on tables by the curb and in the street itself. Tonight, however, neither people nor stores in any sense appealed to me. The mixture of Italians, Jews, and a few Negroes, mostly bareheaded, unkempt, and generally unhygienic in appearance, struck me as merely revolting. They're all humans, and I, too, was human. Some way I did not like the idea. Puzzled a trifle, for I am more inclined to sympathize with poverty than accuse it, I watched the faces that I passed. Never before had I observed how stupid, how bestial, How brutal were the countenances of the dwellers in this region. I actually shuddered when an old clothesman, a gray-bearded Hebrew, brushed me as he toiled past with his barrow. There was a sense of evil in the air, a warning of things which it is wise for a clean man to shun and keep clear of. The impression became so strong that before I had walked 2 squares I began to feel physically ill. Then it occurred to me that the 1 glass of cheap Chianti I had drunk might have something to do with the feeling. Who knew how that stuff had been manufactured, or whether the juice of the grape entered at all into its ill-flavored composition? Yet, I doubted if that were the real cause of my discomfort. By nature, I am rather a sensitive, impressionable sort of chap. In some way, tonight, this neighborhood, with its sordid sights and smells, had struck me wrong. My sense of impending evil was merging into actual fear. This would never do. There was only one way to deal with an imaginative temperament like mine: conquer its vagaries. If I left South Street with the nameless dread upon me, I could never pass down it again without a recurrence of the feeling. I should simply have to stay here until I got the better of it, that was all. I paused on a corner before a shabby but brightly lighted little drugstore. Its gleaming windows and the luminous green of its conventional glass show jars made the brightest spot on the block. I realized that I was tired, but hardly wanted to go in there and rest. I knew what the company would be like at its shabby, sticky soda fountain. As I stood there, my eyes fell on a long white canvas sign across from me, and its black and red lettering caught my attention. "See the great unseen. Come in. This means you. Free to all." A museum of fakes, I thought, but also reflected that if it were a show of some kind, I could sit down for a while, rest, and fight off this increasing obsession of non-existent evil. That side of the street was almost deserted, and the place itself might well be nearly empty. 2. I walked over, but with every step my sense of dread increased. Dread of I knew not what. Bodiless, inexplicable horror had me as in a net whose strands, being intangible, without reason for existence, I could by no means throw off. It was not the people now. None of them were about me. There in the open, lighted street, with no sight nor sound of terror to assail me, I was the shivering victim of such fear as I had never known was possible. Yet still I would not yield. Setting my teeth and fighting with myself as with some pet animal gone mad, I forced my steps to slowness and walked along the sidewalk, seeking entrance. Just here there were no shops, but several doors reached in each case by means of a few iron-railed stone steps. I chose the one in the middle beneath the sign. In that neighborhood there are museums, shops, and other commercial enterprises conducted in many shabby old residences, such as were these. Behind the glazing of the door I had chosen I could see a dim pinkish light, but on either side the windows were quite dark. Trying the door, I found it unlocked. As I opened it, a party of Italians passed on the pavement below, and I looked back at them over my shoulder. They were gaily dressed, men, women, and children, laughing and chattering to one another, probably on their way to some wedding or other festivity. In passing, one of the men glanced up at me, and involuntarily I shuddered back against the door. He was a young man, handsome after the swarthy manner of his race, but never in my life had I seen a face so expressive of pure malicious cruelty, naked and unashamed. Our eyes met, and his seemed to light up with a vile gleaming, as if all the wickedness of his nature had come to a focus in the look of concentrated hate he gave me. They went by, but for some distance I could see him watching me, chin on shoulder, till he and his party were swallowed up in the crowd of marketers farther down the street. Sick and trembling from that encounter, merely of eyes though it had been, I threw aside my partly smoked cigar and entered. Within there was a small vestibule whose ancient tessellated floor was grimy with the passing of many feet. I could feel the grit of dirt under my shoes, and it rasped on my rawly, quivering nerves. The inner door stood partly open, and going on I found myself in a bare, dirty hallway, and was greeted by the sour, musty, poverty-stricken smell common to dwellings of the very ill-to-do. Beyond there was a stairway, carpeted with ragged grass matting. A gas jet, turned low inside a very dusty pink globe, was the light I had seen from without. Listening, the house seemed entirely silent. Surely this was no place of public amusement of any kind whatever. More likely it was a rooming house, and I had, after all, mistaken the entrance. To my intense relief, since coming inside, the worst agony of my unreasonable terror had passed away. If I could only get in some place where I could sit down and be quiet, probably I should be rid of it for good. Determined to try another entrance, I was about to leave the bare hallway when one of several doors along the side of it suddenly opened, and a man stepped out into the hall. "Well?" he said, looking at me keenly, but with not the least show of surprise at my presence. "I beg your pardon," I replied. "The door was unlocked, and I came in here thinking it was the entrance to the exhibit. What do they call it? The Great Unseen, the one that is mentioned on that long white sign. Can you tell me which door is the right one?" "I can." With that brief answer, he stopped and stared at me again. He was a tall, lean man, somewhat stooped, but possessing considerable dignity of bearing. For that neighborhood, he appeared uncommonly well dressed, and his long, smooth-shaven face was noticeable because, while his complexion was dark and his eyes coal-black, above them the heavy brows and his hair were almost silvery white. His age might well have been anything over the 60 mark. I grew tired of being stared at. "If you can and won't, then never mind," I observed a trifle irritably, and turned to go. But his sharp exclamation halted me. "No," he said. No, forgive me for pausing. It was not hesitation, I assure you. To think that one even has come. All day they pass by my sign up there. Pass and fear to enter. But you are different. You are not of these timorous, ignorant foreign peasants. You ask me to tell you the right door? Here it is. Here!" And he struck the panel of the door, which he had closed behind him, so that the sharp yet hollow sound of it echoed up through the silent house. Now it may be thought that after all my senseless terror in the open street, so strange a welcome from so odd a showman would have brought the feeling back full force. But there is an emotion stronger, to a certain point, than fear. This queer old fellow aroused my curiosity. What kind of museum could it be that he accused the passing public of fearing to enter? Nothing really terrible, surely, or it would have been closed by the police. And normally I am not an unduly timorous person. "So, it's in there, is it?" I asked, coming toward him. "And I am to be the sole audience? Come, that will be an interesting experience." I was half laughing now. "The most interesting in the world," said the old man with a solemnity which rebuked my lightness. With that he opened the door, passed inward, and closed it again, in my very face. I stood staring at it blankly. The panels, I remember, had been originally painted white, but now the paint was flaked and blistered, gray with dirt and dirty finger marks. Suddenly it occurred to me that I had no wish to enter there. Whatever was behind it could scarcely be worth seeing, or he would not choose such a place for its exhibition. With the old man's vanishing, my curiosity had cooled, but just as I again turned to leave, the door opened and the singular showman stuck his white-eyebrowed face through the aperture. He was frowning impatiently. Come in, he snapped, and promptly withdrawing his head once more closed the door. "He has something in there he doesn't want should get out," was the very natural conclusion which I drew. Well, since it can hardly be anything dangerous, and he's so anxious I should see it, here goes. With that I turned the soiled white porcelain handle and entered. The room I came into was neither very large nor very brightly lighted. In no way did it resemble a museum or lecture room. On the contrary, it seemed to have been fitted up as a quite well-appointed laboratory. The floor was linoleum-covered, and there were glass cases along the walls, whose shelves were filled with bottles, specimen jars, graduates, and the like. A large table in one corner bore what looked like some odd sort of camera, and a larger one in the middle of the room was fitted with a long rack filled with bottles and test tubes, and was besides littered with papers, glass slides, and various paraphernalia which my ignorance failed to identify. There were several cases of books, a few plain wooden chairs, and in the corner a large iron sink with running water. My host of the white hair and black eyes was awaiting me, standing near the larger table. He indicated one of the wooden chairs with a thin forefinger that shook a little, either from age or eagerness. Sit down. Have no fear but that you will be interested, my friend. Have no fear at all, of anything." As he said it, he fixed his dark eyes upon me and stared harder than ever. But the effect of his words was the opposite of their meaning. I did sit down because my knees gave under me. But if in the outer hall I had lost my terror, it now returned twofold upon me. Out there the light had been faint, dingily roseate, indefinite. By it I had not perceived how this old man's face was a mask of living malice, of cruelty, hate, and a certain masterful contempt. Now I knew the meaning of my fear, whose warning I would not heed. Now I knew that I had walked into the very trap from which my abnormal sensitiveness had striven in vain to save me. 3. Again I struggled within me, bit at my lip till I tasted blood, and presently the blind paroxysm passed. It must have been longer in going than I thought, and the old man must have all that time been speaking, for when I could once more control my attention, hear and see him, he had taken up a position near the sink, about 10 feet away, and was addressing me with a sort of platform manner, as if I had been the large audience whose absence he had deplored. "And so," he was saying, "I was forced to make these plates very carefully, to truly represent the characteristic hues of each separate organism. Now, in color work of every kind, the film is necessarily extremely sensitive. Doubtless you are familiar in a general way with the exquisite transparencies produced by color photography of the single-plate type." He paused, and trying to act like a normal human being, I observed, "I saw some nice landscapes done in that way last week at an illustrated lecture in Franklin Hall." He scowled and made an impatient gesture at me with his hand. "I can proceed better without interruptions," he said. "My pause was purely oratorical." I meekly subsided, and he went on in his original loud, clear voice. He would have made an excellent lecturer before a much larger audience, if only his voice could have lost that eerie ringing tone. Thinking of that, I must have missed some more, and when I caught it again, he was saying, "As I have indicated, the original plate is the final picture. Now, many of these organisms are extremely hard to photograph, and microphotography in color is particularly difficult. In consequence, to spoil a plate tries the patience of the photographer. They are so sensitive that the ordinary dark-room ruby lamp would instantly ruin them, and they must therefore be developed either in darkness or by a special light produced by interposing thin sheets of tissue of a particular shade of green and of yellow between lamp and plate, and even that will often cause ruinous fog. Now I, finding it hard to handle them so, made numerous experiments with a view to discovering some glass or fabric of a color which should add to the safety of the green without robbing it of all efficiency. All proved equally useless, but intermittently I persevered until last week." His voice dropped to an almost confidential tone, and he leaned slightly toward me. I was cold from my neck to my feet, though my head was burning, but I tried to force an appreciative smile. "Last week," he continued impressively, "I had a prescription filled at the corner drugstore. The bottle was sent home to me wrapped in a piece of what I at first took to be whitish, slightly opalescent paper. Later I decided it was some kind of membrane. When I questioned the druggist, seeking its source, he said it was a sheet of paper that was around a bundle of herbs from South America. That he had no more, and doubted if I could trace it. He had wrapped my bottle so because he was in haste and the sheet was handy. I can hardly tell you what first inspired me to try that membrane in my photographic work. It was merely dull white with a faint hint of opalescence, except when held against the light. Then it became quite translucent and quite brightly prismatic. For some reason it occurred to me that this refractive effect might help in breaking up the actinic rays, the rays which affect the sensitive emulsion. So that night I inserted it behind the sheets of green and yellow tissue, next the lamp, prepared my trays and chemicals, laid my plate holders to hand, turned off the white light, and turned on the green." There was nothing in his words to inspire fear. It was a wearisomely detailed account of his struggles with photography. Yet, as he again paused impressively, I wished that he might never speak again. I was desperately, contemptibly in dread of the thing he might say next. Suddenly he drew himself erect. The stoop went out of his shoulders. He threw back his head and laughed. It was a hollow sound, as if he laughed into a trumpet. "I won't tell you what I saw. Why should I? Your own eyes shall bear witness. But this much I'll say so that you may better understand later. When our poor, faultily sensitive vision can perceive a thing, we say that it is visible. When the nerves of touch can feel it, we say that it is tangible. Yet I tell you there are beings, intangible to our physical sense, yet whose presence is felt by the spirit, and invisible to our eyes merely because those organs are not attuned to the light as reflected from their bodies. But light passed through the screen which we are about to use has a wavelength novel to the scientific world, and by it you shall see with the eyes of the flesh that which has been invisible since life began. Have no fear!" He stopped to laugh again, and his mirth was yellow-toothed, menacing. "Have no fear," he reiterated, and with that stretched his hand toward the wall. There came a click, and we were in black, impenetrable darkness. I wanted to spring up, to seek the door by which I had entered, and rush out of it. But the paralysis of unreasoning terror held me fast. I could hear him moving about in the darkness, and a moment later a faint green glimmer sprang up in the room. Its source was over the large sink, where I suppose he developed his precious color plates. Every instant, as my eyes became accustomed to the dimness, I could see more clearly. Green light is peculiar. It may be far fainter than red, and at the same time far more illuminating. The old man was standing beneath it, and his face by that ghastly radiance had the exact look of a dead man's. Beside this, however, I could observe nothing appalling. "That," continued the man, "is the simple developing light of which I have spoken. Now watch, for what you are about to behold no mortal man but myself has ever seen before." For a moment he fussed with the green lamp over the sink. It was so constructed that all the direct rays struck downward. He opened a flap at the side. For a moment there was a streak of comforting white luminance from within. Then he inserted something, slid it slowly in, and closed the flap. The thing he put in, that South American membrane it must have been, instead of decreasing the light, increased it amazingly. The hue was changed from green to greenish-gray, and the whole room sprang into view, a livid, ghastly chamber filled with, overcrawled by... what? My eyes fixed themselves, fascinated on something that moved by the old man's feet. It writhed there on the floor like a huge, repulsive starfish, an immense, armed-legged thing that twisted convulsively. It was smooth as if made of rubber, was whitish-green in color, and presently raised its great round blob of a body on tottering tentacles, crept toward my host and writhed upward. Yes, climbed up his legs, his body. And he stood there, erect, arms folded, and stared sternly down at the thing which climbed. But the room, the whole room, was alive with other creatures than that. Everywhere I looked they were. Centipede-ish things, with yard-long bodies, detestable, furry spiders that lurked in shadows, and sausage-shaped translucent horrors that moved and floated through the air. They dived here and there between me and the light, and I could see its brighter greenness through their greenish bodies. Worse, though, far worse than these, were the things with human faces. Mask-like, monstrous, huge gaping mouths and slit-like eyes. I find I cannot write of them. There was that about them which makes their memory even now intolerable. The old man was speaking again, and every word echoed in my brain like the ringing of a gong. "Fear nothing. Among such as these do you move every hour of the day and night. Only you and I have seen, for God is merciful and has spared our race from sight. But I am not merciful. I loathe the race which gave these creatures birth, the race which might be surrounded by invisible, unguessed but blessed beings, and chooses these for its companions. All the world shall see and know. One by one shall they come here, learn the truth, and perish. For who can survive the ultimate of terror? then I too shall find peace and leave the earth to its heritage of man-created horrors. Do you know what these are? Whence they come?" His voice boomed now like a cathedral bell. I could not answer him, but he waited for no reply. "Out of the ether, out of the omnipresent ether from whose intangible substance the mind of God made the planets, all living things, and man. Man has made these. By his evil thoughts, by his selfish panics, by his lusts, and his interminable, never-ending hate, he has made them. And they are everywhere. Fear nothing. They cannot harm your body. But let your spirit beware. Fear nothing, but see where there comes to you its creator, the shape and the body of your fear." And as he said it, I perceived a great thing coming toward me. A thing, but consciousness could endure no more. The ringing, threatening voice merged in a roar within my ears. There came a merciful dimming of the terrible lurid vision, and blank nothingness succeeded upon horror too great for bearing. 4. There was a dull, heavy pain above my eyes. I knew that they were closed, that I was dreaming, and that the rack full of colored bottles, which I seemed to see so clearly, was no more than a part of the dream. There was some vague but imperative reason why I should rouse myself. I wanted to awaken, and thought that by staring very hard indeed I could dissolve this foolish vision of blue and yellow-brown bottles. But instead of dissolving, they grew clearer, more solid and substantial of appearance, until suddenly the rest of my senses rushed to the support of sight. And I became aware that my eyes were open, the bottles were quite real, and that I was sitting in a chair, fallen sideways so that my cheek rested most uncomfortably on the table which held the rack. I straightened up slowly and with difficulty, groping in my dulled brain for some clue to my presence in this unfamiliar place, this laboratory that was lighted only by the rays of an arc light in the street outside its 3 large windows. Here I sat, alone, and if the aching of cramped limbs meant anything, here I sat for more than a little time. Then, with the painful shock which accompanies awakening to the knowledge of some great catastrophe, came memory. It was this very room, shown by the street lamp's rays to be empty of life, which I had seen thronged with creatures too loathsome for description. I staggered to my feet, staring fearfully about. There were the glass-doored cases, the bookshelves, the 2 tables with their burdens, and the long iron sink above which, now only a dark blotch of shadow, hung the lamp from which had emanated that livid, terrifically revealing illumination. Then the experience had been no dream, but a frightful reality. I was alone here now. With callous indifference, my strange host had allowed me to remain for hours unconscious, with not the least effort to aid or revive me. Perhaps hating me so, he had hoped that I would die there. At first, I made no effort to leave the place. Its appearance filled me with reminiscent loathing. I longed to go, but as yet felt too weak and ill for the effort. Both mentally and physically, my condition was deplorable, and for the first time I realized that a shock to the mind may react upon the body as vilely as any debauch of self-indulgence. Quivering in every nerve and muscle, dizzy with headache and nausea, I dropped back into the chair, hoping that before the old man returned I might recover sufficient self-control to escape him. I knew that he hated me, and why. As I waited, sick, miserable, I understood the man. Shuddering, I recalled the loathsome horrors he had shown me. If the mere desires and emotions of mankind were daily carnified in such forms as those, no wonder that he viewed his fellow beings with detestation and longed only to destroy them. I thought, too, of the cruel, sensuous faces I had seen in the streets outside, seen for the first time as if a veil had been withdrawn from my eyes hitherto blinded by self-delusion. Fatuously trustful as a month-old puppy, I'd lived in a grim, evil world where goodness is a word and crude selfishness the only actuality. Drearily my thoughts drifted back through my own life, its futile purposes, mistakes, and activities. All of evil that I knew returned to overwhelm me. Our gropings toward divinity were a sham. a writhing sunward of slime-covered beasts who claimed sunlight as their heritage, but in their hearts preferred the foul and easy depths. Even now, though I could neither see nor feel them, this room, the entire world, was a crawl with the beings created by our real natures. I recalled the cringing, contemptible fear to which my spirit had so readily yielded, and the faceless thing to which the emotion had given birth. Then, abruptly, shockingly, I remembered that every moment I was adding to the horde. Since my mind could conceive only repulsive incubi, and since while I lived I must think, feel, and so continue to shape them, was there no way to check so abominable a succession? My eyes fell on the long shelves with their many-colored bottles. In the chemistry of photography there are deadly poisons. I knew that. Now was the time to end it. Now! Let him return and find his desire accomplished. One good thing I could do, if one only. I could abolish my monster-creating self. 5. My friend Mark Jenkins is an intelligent and usually a very careful man. When he took from Smiler Callahan a cigar which had every appearance of being excellent, innocent Havana, the act denoted both intelligence and caution. By very clever work he had traced the poisoning of young Ralph Peeler to Mr. Callahan's door, and he believed this particular cigar to be the mate of one smoked by Peeler just previous to his demise. And if, upon arresting Callahan, he had not confiscated this bit of evidence, it would have doubtless been destroyed by its regrettably unconscientious owner. But when Jenkins shortly afterward gave me that cigar, as one of his own, he committed one of those almost inconceivable blunders which I think are occasionally forced upon clever men to keep them from overweening vanity. Discovering his slight mistake, my detective friend spent the night searching for his unintended victim, myself, and that his search was successful was due to Pietro Marini, a young Italian of Jenkins' acquaintance, whom he met about the hour of 2 a.m. returning from a dance. Now, Marini had seen me standing on the steps of the house where Dr. Frederick Holt had his laboratory and living rooms, and he had stared at me, not with any ill intent, but because he thought I was the sickest-looking, most ghastly specimen of humanity that he had ever beheld. And sharing the superstition of his South Street neighbors, he wondered if the worthy doctor had poisoned me as well as Peeler. This suspicion he imparted to Jenkins, who, however, had the best of reasons for believing otherwise. Moreover, as he informed Marini, Holt was dead, having drowned himself late the previous afternoon. An hour or so after our talk in the restaurant, news of his suicide reached Jenkins. It seemed wise to search any place where a very sick-looking young man had been seen to enter, so Jenkins came straight to the laboratory. Across the fronts of those houses was the long sign with its mysterious inscription, "See the Great Unseen," not at all mysterious to the detective. He knew that next door to Dr. Holt's the second floor had been thrown together into a lecture room, where, at certain hours, a young man employed by settlement workers displayed upon a screen stereopticon views of various deadly bacilli, the germs of diseases appropriate to dirt and indifference. He knew, too, that Dr. Holt himself had helped the educational effort along by providing some really wonderful lantern slides done by microcolor photography. On the pavement outside, Jenkins found the 2/3 remnant of a cigar, which he gathered in and came up the steps, a very miserable and self-reproachful detective. Neither outer nor inner door was locked, and in the laboratory he found me alive, but on the verge of death by another means than he had feared. In the extreme physical depression following my awakening from drugged sleep, and knowing nothing of its cause, I believed my adventure fact in its entirety. My mentality was at too low an ebb to resist its dreadful suggestion. I was searching among Holt's various bottles when Jenkins burst in. At first I was merely annoyed at the interruption of my purpose, but before the anticlimax of his explanation the mists of obsession drifted away, and left me still sick in body, but in spirit happy as any man may well be who has suffered a delusion that the world is wholly bad, and learned that its badness springs from his own poisoned brain. The malice which I had observed in every face, including young Marini's, existed only in my drug-affected vision. Last week's popular science lecture had been recalled to my subconscious mind, the mind that rules dreams and delirium, by the photographic apparatus in Holt's workroom. See, the great unseen assisted materially, and even the corner drugstore before which I had paused with its green-lit show vases had doubtless played a part. But presently, following something Jenkins told me, I was driven to one protest. "If Holt was not here," I demanded, "if Holt is dead, as you say, how do you account for the fact that I, who have never seen the man, was able to give you an accurate description, which you admit to be that of Dr. Frederick Holt?" He pointed across the room. "See that?" It was a life-size bust portrait in crayons, the picture of a white-haired man with bushy eyebrows and the most piercing black eyes I had ever seen, until the previous evening. It hung facing the door and near the windows, and the features stood out with a strangely lifelike appearance in the white rays of the arc lamp just outside. "Upon entering," continued Jenkins, "the first thing you saw was that portrait, and from it your delirium built a living, speaking man. So there are your white-haired showman, your unnatural fear, your color photography, and your pretty green gollywogs, all nicely explained for you, Blaisdell, and thank God you're alive to hear the explanation. If you had smoked the whole of that cigar... well, never mind. You didn't, and now, my very dear friend, I think it's high time that you interviewed a real flesh-and-blood doctor. I'll phone for a taxi." "Don't," I said. "A walk in the fresh air will do me more good than 50 doctors." "Fresh air? There's no fresh air on South Street in July," complained Jenkins, but reluctantly yielded. I had a reason for my preference. I wished to see people, to meet face to face, even such stray prowlers as might be about at this hour, nearer sunrise than midnight, and rejoice in the goodness and kindliness of the human countenance, particularly as found in the lower classes. But even as we were leaving, there occurred to me a curious inconsistency. "Jenkins," I said, "you claim that the reason Holt, when I first met him in the hall, appeared to twice close the door in my face was because the door never opened until I myself unlatched it." "Yes," confirmed Jenkins, but he frowned, foreseeing my next question. "Then why, if it was from that picture that I built so solid, so convincing a vision of the man, did I see Holt in the hall before the door was open?" "You confuse your memories," retorted Jenkins rather shortly. "Do I? Holt was dead at that hour, but I tell you I saw Holt outside the door. And what was his reason for committing suicide?" Before my friend could reply, I was across the room, fumbling in the dusk there at the electric lamp above the sink. I got the tin flap open and pulled out the sliding screen, which consisted of 2 sheets of glass with fabric between, dark on one side, yellow on the other. With it came the very thing I dreaded, a sheet of whitish, parchment-like, slightly opalescent stuff. Jenkins was beside me as I held it at arm's length toward the windows. Through it the light of the arc lamp fell, divided into the most astonishingly brilliant rainbow hues. And instead of diminishing the light, it was perceptibly increased in the oddest way. Almost one thought that the sheet itself was luminous, and yet when held in shadow it gave off no light at all. "Shall we put it in the lamp again, and try it?" asked Jenkins slowly, and in his voice there was no hint of mockery. I looked him straight in the eyes. "No," I said, "we won't. I was drugged. Perhaps in that condition I received a merciless revelation of the discovery that caused Holt's suicide. But I don't believe it. Ghost or no ghost, I refuse to ever again believe in the depravity of the human race. If the air and the earth are teeming with invisible horrors, they are not of our making, and the study of demonology is better let alone. Shall we burn this thing or tear it up?" "We have no right to do either," returned Jenkins thoughtfully. "But, you know, Blaisdell, there's a little too darn much realism about some parts of your dream. I haven't been smoking any dope cigars, but when you held that up to the light, I'll swear I saw... Well, never mind. Burn it. Send it back to the place it came from." "South America?" said I. "A hotter place than that. Burn it." So he struck a match, and we did. It was gone in one great white flash. A large place was given by morning papers to the suicide of Dr. Frederick Holt, caused, it was surmised, by mental derangement brought about by his unjust implication in the Peeler murder. It seemed an inadequate reason, since he had never been arrested, but no other was ever discovered. Of course, our action in destroying that membrane was illegal and rather precipitate, but though he won't talk about it, I know that Jenkins agrees with me. Doubt is sometimes better than certainty, and there are marvels better left unproved. Those, for instance, which concern the powers of evil.
Over the Wire by Eugene Jones. Snow and ice on that mountain. Nothing but snow. The wind drove it with a howl against the windows where it stuck on the warm panes. Sometimes I could just make out the blur of the semaphore lights, and sometimes I couldn't. All day the blizzard had dumped its swirling load about us, and now, when night closed down, the storm took the tower in its teeth, shaking it like you've seen a dog shake a rat. Oh, we were warm and cozy enough with our stove red hot, which was more than Donaldson, the agent at Hastings, could say. His wire talk was rotten, chattery, and he told us he'd run out of coal. Looked like he'd freeze to death, according to him. But Big Ben prophesied grimly that Donaldson could take care of himself, so we might as well save our worries. I don't suppose you ever heard of Big Ben, but that is your loss. Every soul on the Mountain Division knew him. His Morse snapped out like a track torpedo. Fast, too, but accurate, staccato, with a smooth flow as if a machine had hold of the key. Dots and dashes were part of him, for after years of it, he could express himself better that way. Sort of feeling for the language, I suppose. I've seen the same gift since, but never to the extent Ben possessed it. Why, he could come mighty close to telling the color of your eyes over a telegraph wire. He and I had worked Tower BB-17 on the Mountain Division for 3 years, and during that time I never saw him flurried. Once a freight, running extra, got by us. Dispatcher tangled up his train sheet. 40 minutes later a relay came in to stop her, or she'd meet 87 on the big grade. It takes just 40 minutes to run from our tower to Hastings, further down the line. Hastings is the last station with a siding before the grade. In other words, the freight ought to have been getting her okay from Hastings right then. Was Ben excited? Not one little bit. Donaldson caught his first call. Clear as a bell it was, and Donaldson had time to flag the freight. But the particular night I'm speaking of, my side partner appeared a bit uneasy, which was enough to set my think tank working. He'd drop down alongside the quay for a moment, then he'd wander over to the windows, trying to pierce the blizzard. He was a big man with a hearty laugh and a mouthful of teeth and a whiskered chin full of determination. His red hair, as brilliant as the glow in his corncob pipe, usually stood on end, but his eyes were gray and pleasant. That is, generally they were. Yet I've noticed 'em hard as rocks, drilling into you with a gleam in 'em like you see jumping across a spark gap. Right now they were anxious. Perhaps that wasn't so strange either, for all day long, from the length of the division, had come bunches of trouble. A snow shed out here, a freight ditch there, hell to pay everywhere. Wires were down, too. Not a word could we get below Hastings or north of the junction. Toward night, every siding was overflowing with dead-headed rolling stock. You see, the big grade, it's 4.5% in places, handicaps us because even our best oil burners won't haul much tonnage on it in a blizzard. They can't make steam. And this particular frolic of the elements promised to beat anything that had struck us in 20 years. At 10 p.m., the chief dispatcher ordered the line cleared for the night, barring number 77 southbound, which was to make her run as usual. I reckon you've heard of that train, the Cumberland Limited, all steel and solid Pullman. She was to follow a snowplow, and headquarters gossip filtering to us hinted she might find the blizzard a bit of a teaser. Suddenly, Big Ben turned on me. "Jim," said he, "I don't like it. What's the old man thinking of to let 77 through? Have you heard what she's carrying tonight?" I allowed I hadn't. "Well, there's something like 100,000 in gold in her express car. Government consignment. I got it straight. What a chance for a holdup. Remember that cut below Hastings? He shook his massive head dubiously. It's been done before. As if to emphasize his words, the storm swooped down with renewed energy until the tower swayed like a lighthouse. Great guns! How the wind shrieked at us. How the snow thudded against the windows. And when you hear snow, you know there's a double-headed gale behind it. About that time, our call came over the wire. NH, NH, NH. As Ben jumped in, I put down my paper to listen. I find it's a good thing to pay pretty strict attention to anything on a night like that. It keeps you from seeing shadows that aren't there and hearing sounds which your common sense tells you must be the wind. Presently came the professional dot and dash of Donaldson down at Hastings. Now Donaldson, next to Big Ben, was a star operator, and the two of them could talk better and with more satisfaction over a stretch of singing wire than if they were sitting together in a parlor. Even I knew Donaldson's style, although I wasn't more than middling expert. There were tricks in his stuff, such as shortening his O's, but his Morse ran mighty smooth. I read off the message to myself. Freezing cold down here, Ben. Lonely, too. Damn lonely. What do you get on 77? The big man at the table cut in. Brace up. 77 on time. Nothing to bother her tonight except the storm. All freight dead-headed. That seemed to satisfy Donaldson, for there was a long silence broken only by the whine of the wind and the thud-thud of driven snow. I had just picked up the paper again when NH, NH, NH snapped at us. The crispness of dots and dashes suggested excitement. Ben acknowledged deliberately, but when he closed the wire, I saw a narrowing of his eyes. Donaldson was in a hurry. Going to quit tomorrow, he began. Can't stand this joint. Say, there's two of you up there. You're lucky. Old man will have to come across with an assistant or I quit. Do you know you're the nearest white man to me? Just me alone here. No night for a man to be alone. Hold on. I think I hear somebody in the waiting room. Maybe I'll have company. But he opened up again the next moment with, Good Lord, must be going off my nut. Nobody in the waiting room. It's the wind. I tell you, this place is like the North Pole. If I could only hear a fire crackling. Say, there it goes again. No, I'm way off. That's a fact. I'll have to look around. Do you notice anything funny in the wind? I seem to. Why the devil didn't they put shades on these windows? What's the matter with me, anyhow? Ben went back at him, calm as a summer's day. Hold on, old man. Take some whiskey. It's your nerves. Get a grip on yourself. All right, answered Donaldson, his wire talk becoming calmer. Yes, I'll take the whiskey. Let me know about 77. That was all for a while, but Ben eyed me through the fumes of his pipe. I don't like it, he muttered. Not a bit. Never knew Donaldson to wildcat before. Wonder if there is anything wrong. I didn't say what was on my mind, for the shriek of the storm interrupted. So we just sat still and looked at each other and wondered what it would be like if either of us weren't there. Somehow I couldn't get rid of the picture of Hastings Station, a little frame building backed up against a cliff, with a siding cutting in behind it and the banked curve of the main line stretching away before it. A few farmers used the station, but a water tank was its real excuse for existence. I could see how the snow had half buried it and how Donaldson, veteran that he was, might hear strange sounds in the gale. I could see a great many things right then, but the sight wasn't pleasant. Snow, snow and more snow, and icy rails and low hurrying clouds you felt were brushing up against the tower. Listen, I snapped. Ben jumped to his feet. This won't do. Here you, quit listening or you'll be as bad as Donaldson. Then he came over to me. I guess it's just as well there are two of us, he said very quietly. Try the junction for a report on 77. I took the key with a sense of awe. Only a couple of slim wires between us and the world, and 1,000 chances for the storm to tear him down. But if we felt it, what about Donaldson? What about Donaldson, anyway? The junction answered after a bit, though there was no life in the sending. McFlynn, nodded Ben. I know his style. Ask him whether the orders for 77 stand. I did. Sure, clicked McFlynn. 77 on time. Pass her through. Rotten night, isn't it? They got a plow leading the limited like a blind baby. So long. That was at 11:02. 20 minutes later, Donaldson started after us again, but it was a chattering, wild Donaldson, a new Donaldson who tumbled his letters over each other. NH, 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 he stuttered, even after I had opened the wire. NH, NH. I sent him a string of R's a mile long before he acknowledged. Then, what's the matter with you up there? He clicked. Gone to sleep? But you can't sleep now. You gotta talk to me or I'll be ready for the queer house. Something is walking up and down outside my window. I've seen it twice. It can't be a man, and animals don't prowl about in a storm like this. Listen to that wind. I tell you it's walking around the station. What am I saying? Do you believe in ghosts? It was in the waiting room a while back, but it got out before I had a shot at it. What would you do if you were down here alone, snowed in like a damned Eskimo? What would you do if it started to walk? Big Ben strode across the room. Give me the key, he thundered. His eyes were hard gray now, like rock, with little points of fire in them, and it seemed he would smash the instrument as he crashed down with Donaldson's call. Stop that, went the dots and dashes, clear-cut, fast, but lordy, they had a punch behind them. Pull yourself together. Take some more whiskey. Wake up. Remember you're an operator. You've got to handle the limited tonight. No more of that. You know damn well nothing is walking around down there except you. Rub some snow in your face. Wake up, I say. I'll talk to you as much as you like, but no more spook stuff. You're right, came the slower response. I won't bother you anymore. Nevertheless, it's walking around here. Maybe I'll get a shot at it. I'll let you know if I do. That was all, and Ben and I looked across the table into each other's eyes. Well, I questioned. He shook himself as if trying to get rid of something clinging. Oh, Donaldson is getting old, he muttered. It's lonely down there and his fire's out. That's what I make of it. When the wind howls and you're on a night shift in a godforsaken spot like Hastings, you're mighty apt to hear and see a little more than you've any business to. The next word that came flashing over the wire left no doubt in our minds. Either Donaldson was clean crazy or, well, he must be crazy. Ever see a face half black and half white? Stuttered our instrument. I had a shot at it. It's still walking. Ben waited an instant, then sent JJ, Donaldson's call, steady for 3 minutes. But he might as well have opened the window and yelled out into the storm. The wire was either dead or Hastings wouldn't answer. Presently, McFlynn at the junction got busy. Just okayed 7-7, he said. Devilish night. The limited looked like a hunk of the mountain on wheels. Bet the snow on the car roofs gets scraped off on the top of the tunnels. Happy dreams. But we weren't to indulge in any happy dreams for some time to come. Hardly had McFlynn shut up when NH, 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 called Ben back. Lord, he groaned. Hear that style? It's Donaldson. But what's happened to him? I hate to listen to it. Dull, lifeless, flat came the dots and dashes from Hastings. No use, clicked Donaldson. This hide and seek is beyond me. Its face is half black and half white, and bullets don't worry it. I'm a gone duck. Never mind me. Anyhow, hell is warm and not as lonesome as this. I'm freezing, and that's no ghost story. For God's sake, Ben's reply flew forth. Can that stuff. Pull yourself together, old man. Forget the face or whatever it is. 77's on time. Hold hard. Sure, agreed Donaldson wearily. I'll handle the limited. How's the storm up there? Quitting, lied Ben, and went to the window. Then followed an hour of silence with only the shriek of the wind and the thud of snow. I reckon the two of us smoked considerable tobacco during that hour, and we played a few games of checkers, too. But our minds wandered. When at last we heard the shrill squeal of 77's whistle above the noise of the blizzard, we felt happy. Just to know there were other people near us. Believe me, that was some relief. Far off up the line, we could make out the headlight of the Limited, like a blinking misty moon creeping toward us. Ben glanced at his semaphore levers. Down she bore on us, the din of her drivers muffled by snow. There was the thunder of moving tons, a blast of cinders against the tower windows, and a snaky line of black as the Pullmans flashed past, under their white caps. We watched her red taillights around the curve. JJ, 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 clicked Ben back at the table. And directly, Hastings answered in the same lifeless style. Limited just past okay, went on my side partner. How are you feeling? Donaldson's wire talk was worse than ever. Fine, he stuttered. Maybe I can hold out. The damn thing's always near me. It's cold here. I've got my feet on the stove. Say, this stove is a joke. It's so empty it's going to cave in pretty soon. Wait a minute, let me try another shot. Nothing more. Not another word, though we took turns at the key. And when Ben relighted his pipe, I didn't like the look on his face. Jim, he began, there's things in this world none of us can understand. I reckon after all that, maybe I misjudged Donaldson. Perhaps he's up against one of them. Quit, I bellowed. You watch yourself or you'll be splitting a switch too. As you said a while back, Donaldson's nervous and cold. That's what's the matter with him. Nothing else. Ben, mumbling a reply, turned again to the window. If possible, the storm was worse. I don't exactly remember how it happened. I must have dozed off about them, being pretty tuckered out. Anyhow, the first thing I knew, Ben was shaking the life out of me. I'll never forget the expression of his face as I opened my eyes. His eyes were all red, his hands were working, his jaw set. Wake up, Jim, he hissed. I heard it too. No, he went on as I instinctively looked toward the window. Not there. Over the wire. Listen. I listened, but for a long time nothing broke the vibrating stillness of the tower, and I got to thinking it was another case of nerves. Then, Father above us, may I never again hear such a sound. Our instrument started to whisper. You'll laugh, do you? But if you'd been there, you wouldn't have laughed. We went over to the table on tiptoe, hardly daring to breathe. The little steel bar trembled, moved down, snapped back, barely closing the contact. It was like a dying man framing words he couldn't utter. I followed in my mind the course of the single drumming wire over the trestles, through the ravines, under the mountains. What manner of thing was pressing the key at the other end? Ben dropped forward with an oath and pillowed his elbows on the table as if his nearness might aid him. Listen, he begged. Oh, Jim, listen! Presently, the instrument quivered again, but this time the impulse was stronger, horribly flaccid, monotonously regular. Like the labored effort of an amateur, came the message which shall forever sear my memory with unspeakable horror. God in heaven, help me. I can't stand this. They chained cross ties to the rails. They will ditch the Limited. I'm done for. Hell is nearer now. Help, dear God, help me. That was all. Ben tore at the key, sending out into the night, JJ, 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 until my head swam. But no response came, not the least flutter, only agonizing, storm-shrieking silence. Then he gave it up and staggered to his feet. His face was as gray as slate. Jim, he gasped, Donaldson is dead. I know it. It was a dying man who sent that message. I grabbed him by the shoulders. You fool, I yelled. He can't be dead. He sent it. Don't you understand? They're going to wreck the Limited. Donaldson was telling us. He may be wounded. We've got to get to him. Slowly, as if his body was awakening from sleep, the muscles in his shoulders under my hand tightened. Sure, I get you, he whispered. And before I knew what he was doing, he shook me off, rushing blindly for the stairs. "Come on, Jim, for God's sake, hurry," he called. "Bring my gun and some torpedoes. It's only 5 miles by the road, 30 down the mountain by the track. Let's try the car." I stopped long enough to be sure the revolver we kept in a drawer was loaded, stuffed some torpedoes in my pocket, and followed him. Out into the gale, he sped to where he kept his little second-hand mud-spattered gas wagon. I had always kidded him about it, laughed at it, but now I prayed. Yes, funny when you think of it, me praying. But I did. Prayed it would run. Prayed there was gas and oil in it. Once away from the lee of the building, the storm wrapped around us, flinging the snow in our faces, making us gasp for breath. We were taking desperate chances and breaking all rules. This leaving a tower vacant? But what could we do? What in God's name could we do? When I caught up with Ben, he was cranking the engine desperately. I propped the shanty door open, though the blast of wind threatened to fairly tear it from its hinges. Fortunately, the radiator of the car had antifreezing mixture in it. After an agonizing moment, the engine gave a couple of disgusted coughs and died, but Ben went right on. He spun that thing till I was dizzy as I sat with my hand on the throttle, feeding it raw gas. Then there seemed no chance left, and I could see the Limited a burning blackened mass, and hear the cries of the injured. The engine started, missing like thunder to be sure. Ben leapt in beside me and let in his clutch. Once beyond the shanty, our headlights ended in a whirling bank of snow, and the cold stabbed like a driven nail. But the engine was running better now. How my side partner found the road, or how he kept that rickety piece of junk from chucking us down a ravine, I'll never know. But he did. Yes, by the grace of the Lord, he did. Pitching like a ship in a storm, sinking now and then up to our hubs, we jounced on down that mountain. What everlasting miles of emptiness, what biting pain as our ears and hands and noses turned red, then white. Once we heard the shriek of the Limited below us on the grade. Once we saw the flash of her furnace door. Seconds turned into minutes, minutes into hours. Would we be in time? I set my teeth and prayed some more. We had hit the last stretch, and through the smother we could see the semaphore lights of Hastings Station. Also the light in the building itself. Our car snorted and groaned as Ben fed at the gas, skidding to the edge of a precipice or flinging us half out of our seats, but we never thought of that. And now came the wail of the Limited's whistle, this time above us. Her headlight flickered across the cut, touching the station with uncertain fingers. The semaphore was set green. I shivered, but not from cold. If only we had half a chance, but the everlasting snow, how it clung to our wheels. And under it, our tire chains spun gratingly in red clay, which flecked the white of the road like blood. Bearing down on Hastings Station, gathering speed with each pound of her drivers, thundered the Limited. We were playing the passage of a minute against a pile of cross ties, and the forfeit was death. Now we reached the nearest point to the right-of-way, and as we jerked to a halt, a black figure appeared on the depot platform against the light. I saw the flash of a gun and heard a bullet sing past. But Ben paid no heed. Throwing himself from the car, he floundered over to the track. I ran toward the station, firing as I went. Once I looked back. Ben was kneeling down, adjusting torpedoes under the very pilot of the plow. Now, there isn't any use of my explaining how the Limited roared by, her engineer satisfied with the green of the semaphore, nor how he gave her the air when the torpedoes warned him, nor, for that matter, of the futile pursuit of the bandits who had intended to ditch her. All that came out in the morning paper. If I remember, there was even a picture of the pile of cross ties chained to the track. The fact that will interest you is what we discovered in Hastings Station. Without bothering to explain to 77's wondering crew, we dashed into the waiting room and threw open the door of the ticket office. At the table sat Donaldson. He was stiff and rigid, and from an ugly blotched hole in his neck there crept a frozen stream of blood. His right hand still rested on the telegraph key. "Good God," I muttered. "Dead!" He never moved after he was shot. And then, somehow, feeling Ben's eyes upon me, I looked at him. His smile was ghastly. Sure, he said. I told you so back in the tower. He never moved after he was shot. Then what about that message? How did he know about the crossed eyes? Shut up, I shrieked. Here, let's get him out of this. We'll go down on 77. I'm through.